An accidental touch, and I realized my daughter-in-law's eyes were not normal. That single moment, so brief, so ordinary on the surface, changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about the quiet life I had been leading. I should start by telling you who I am. My name doesn't matter much, but I am a man in my late 50s, a father, a husband, a person who once believed he had already lived through the most turbulent years of his life. I was never one for reckless passions. I married young, worked hard, raised my son, and thought I had done enough to earn the simple reward of peace in my later years. My life was never glamorous, but it was steady, predictable. Even if you asked the neighbors about me, they would probably say I'm reliable, a man who minds his business, who keeps to his routines, and they wouldn't be wrong. I've always prided myself on being the kind of person who never strays outside the lines, who carries the weight of duty with quiet persistence. My wife trusted me for that very reason. My son respected me. I thought that would be enough. But life has a strange way of testing you when you least expect it. Sometimes, the greatest storms begin, not with thunder, but with the faintest breeze. That breeze entered my life the day my son brought home his wife. I still remember the first time I saw her. She stood shyly by his side, her hands folded, her smile polite but hesitant. She wasn't the kind of woman who dazzled at first glance. No. Her beauty revealed itself slowly. Like a secret only the patient could discover, there was a gentleness in her, but also a quiet strength in the way she held herself. At the time, I thought little of it. She was my son's bride, the woman who would build a life with him, the person who would hopefully bring joy to our family. I welcomed her warmly, like any father should. And for a while, everything seemed ordinary enough. But the truth is, ordinary moments can hide extraordinary truths. I began to notice small things. The way she carried an air of loneliness even when surrounded by family. The way her laughter, when it came, seemed too light, too practiced, as though she were performing happiness rather than truly feeling it. And her eyes, yes, those eyes always seemed to hold a weight that words never touched. I told myself I was imagining things, that she was simply adjusting to married life, to living under the same roof with in-laws, to the newness of it all. I brushed aside the feeling, convinced myself it wasn't my place to wonder. But then came that accidental touch. It happened on an unremarkable day. I was reaching for a dish at the table, and she was doing the same. Our hands met, just for a second, skin against skin, and when I looked up, her eyes were already on mine. I can't explain what I saw there, not in plain terms. It wasn't just surprise, or politeness, or even embarrassment. It was something deeper, something raw, unguarded. It was as if for that brief instant, the mask she always wore slipped, and I glimpsed the storm beneath. Pain, longing, a silent plea that I couldn't ignore. It unsettled me. I withdrew my hand quickly, forced a smile, tried to dismiss the moment. But the image of her eyes lingered long after the plates were cleared, long after the evening ended. That night, lying beside my wife, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, those eyes, that fleeting look. And I began to ask myself questions I had no business asking. What was she carrying inside? What truth was buried in her silence? Why had that single touch felt like the opening of a door I hadn't even known existed? It's strange how a man can live half a century believing he knows himself, only to realize, in a single moment, that he doesn't. I want to be clear. I didn't fall in love with her in that instant. No. It was something more complicated, more dangerous than that. The recognition of another soul who was, in some way, as restless, as unseen, as I secretly was. And that recognition, well, it terrified me. For days after, I avoided her gaze. I spoke only when necessary, kept my tone light, acted as though nothing had changed. But inside, I was unsettled. I felt like a man walking along the edge of a cliff, acutely aware that one wrong step could send him plummeting. Yet, the more I tried to pull away, the more attuned I became to her presence. The sound of her footsteps in the hallway, the way her voice softened when she spoke to my son, even if his answers were distracted, half-hearted. The small sighs she gave when she thought no one was listening. I began to see her not just as my son's wife, but as a person carrying unspoken burdens. And once you see someone like that, it's impossible to unsee them. Maybe you think I'm weak. Maybe you think I should have shut my heart, turned my eyes away, reminded myself of the boundaries that must never be crossed. And perhaps you're right, but I am not telling you this story to make myself look noble. I am telling you because it is the truth. And the truth is, that accidental touch awakened something in me I had buried for years. A hunger not for romance alone, but for connection. For being seen, heard, understood. For the spark that tells you you're alive, even when the rest of the world insists you should be content with silence. That is how it began. Not with intention, not with desire, but with a touch so brief that anyone else would have forgotten it. But I couldn't, because in her eyes, I saw not just her, but myself. And that realization was the beginning of everything. After that first accidental touch, I thought I could simply put it behind me. Pretend it had never happened. A small slip in an otherwise ordinary life. But you can't unsee what your heart has already recognized. You can't unfeel what has been awakened. The incident that truly set everything in motion came weeks later, on a night that seemed so ordinary it could have disappeared into the blur of memory, if not for what unfolded. It was late autumn. The evenings had grown cooler, the air crisp, and the sky darkened quickly after dinner. My wife had gone to spend the night with her sister, who had fallen ill. My son was working late, as usual. That left just the two of us in the house, me and my daughter-in-law. At first, I tried to avoid the situation. I told myself I would retreat to my room, lose myself in old books, and wait for the hours to pass. But fate has a way of placing you exactly where you most fear to be. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a thin blanket around her shoulders, staring blankly at the television. The sound was on, but it was clear she wasn't watching. Her eyes were distant, her body tense. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice cautious. She startled slightly, then forced a small smile. "Yes, Father. I'm fine." But I knew she wasn't fine. The tone was too rehearsed, too fragile. I hesitated, then sat at the far end of the couch, leaving a respectful distance. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the murmur of the television. Minutes passed. And then, without looking at me, she spoke. "Do you ever feel," she began softly, "that no one really sees you? That you can be surrounded by people, even loved ones, and yet you feel invisible?" Her words pierced me, because they were my own thoughts, spoken aloud by someone else. I felt my throat tighten. "Yes," I admitted quietly, "more often than I'd like to confess." She turned her head then, her eyes meeting mine. And in that gaze, the mask slipped again. The same rawness I had seen during that accidental touch now shone clearly, unhidden. Her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "My husband, your son." Her voice faltered, but she pushed on. "He's a good man. He provides. He works hard. But he doesn't hear me. Not really. I talk, but it's like speaking into an empty room. And after a while, you stop talking altogether." She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, as if to shield against a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I sat frozen, torn between the role I was supposed to play and the undeniable pull of her words. She wasn't just confiding in me, she was revealing the silent prison she lived in, and God help me, I understood that prison too well. "I know what you mean," I whispered. "Sometimes I feel the same. Even in this house, surrounded by family, I feel like a ghost. Everyone sees me, but no one really sees me." The moment those words left my lips, I realized I had crossed an invisible boundary. A father-in-law should never speak so vulnerably to his son's wife. But it was too late. The truth had slipped out. Raw and unfiltered. She looked at me then, really looked. And something shifted in the air between us. The television faded into background noise. The room seemed smaller, the silence heavier. She reached out, as though to place her hand on mine, but stopped midway, her fingers curling back. The gesture was small, fleeting, but it set my heart pounding. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, looking down. "I shouldn't be saying these things to you. It's inappropriate." But I shook my head. Sometimes the person you least expect is the one who understands." Her lips trembled, as if she were holding back 1,000 unspoken words. Then she rose abruptly, muttering something about preparing tea, and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat there, my hands clenched, my chest tight. That night marked the true beginning, the first confession of loneliness, the first shared recognition of emptiness. And though nothing physical passed between us in that moment, something far more dangerous had. Intimacy. A secret bond, invisible yet undeniable, woven from threads of silence and understanding. From that evening on, I began to notice her differently, not in a lustful way, though desire would come later, but in the way one notices a wounded bird, fragile, trembling, yet still carrying the strength to fly. When she laughed, I wondered how much of it was real. When she sighed, I longed to ask what burden pressed on her heart. And when she smiled politely at my son, I felt a strange mix of pity, guilt, and something I dared not name. I told myself I was only being compassionate, only listening when no one else would. But deep down, I knew I was standing at the edge of something far more treacherous. The true inciting incident wasn't her words, or even her tears. It was the recognition we both shared that night, that in each other, we had found someone who finally heard us. And once that recognition blooms, it cannot be undone. That night, as I lay awake in the quiet house, I realized I had crossed the threshold into dangerous territory. The story that would change everything had already begun. After that night, nothing was ever quite the same between us. On the surface, everything looked normal. She still greeted me politely, called me father, and kept her routines intact. But underneath, a silent current pulled at both of us, drawing us closer in ways neither of us dared acknowledge. I began noticing the smallest things, how she lingered a moment longer when handing me a cup of tea, how her eyes sometimes sought mine during family dinners, how her voice softened when she spoke to me alone. They were subtle gestures, invisible to anyone else. But to me, they were thunderclaps in the silence of my life, and I responded, though not always consciously. I found excuses to help her in small ways, fixing a cabinet door, carrying heavy groceries, sitting with her when my son worked late. At first, I justified it as duty, as kindness, but inside, I knew it was more than that. I wanted her presence. I wanted the rare warmth of being seen. One evening, while my wife was in the garden and my son hadn't yet returned, she asked me to help change a light bulb in the upstairs hallway. It was such a trivial request, yet it led to a moment that shook me deeply. I climbed the small ladder, unscrewed the burnt bulb, and reached for the replacement she handed me. As I turned, our fingers brushed deliberate this time, not accidental. She didn't pull back, neither did I. For just a second, we held onto that light bulb together, our hands touching, our eyes locked. A simple household chore had become charged with unspoken meaning. My heart pounded so loudly I feared my wife downstairs might hear it. She finally let go. Her cheeks flushed, and whispered, "Thank you." 2 words, so ordinary. Yet I carried them with me all night like a secret flame. From then on, the tension only grew. Conversations became deeper, longer. She began confiding more in me, small details at first. How she missed her mother's cooking. How she felt out of place among my son's friends. How she sometimes dreamed of traveling but never had the chance. I listened, truly listened. And each confession drew me further into her world. One afternoon, rain poured heavily outside. The house was quiet, my wife napping, my son at work. She came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea, her hair slightly damp from the humidity. She sat beside me, closer than usual. Without preamble, she said, "Do you know what the hardest part of marriage is?" I shook my head. It's not the chores, or the bills, or even the arguments. It's the silence. The silence when your heart is screaming to be understood, but no one bothers to listen. Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. She just looked at me, waiting. And I felt something break inside me. I know that silence, I admitted. I've lived with it for years. Her hand moved slightly, resting just a breath away from mine on the sofa cushion. We didn't touch, but the space between us burned hotter than fire. From that day, she sought me out more often. Sometimes just for help in the kitchen. Sometimes for nothing at all, standing at the doorway of my study, asking what I was reading, pretending interest in books she had never cared about before. And I let her. God forgive me, I welcomed it. But with every moment, the line blurred further. I no longer knew where father-in-law ended and man began. The most dangerous moment came on a winter night. My wife had gone to visit relatives. My son was away on a business trip. The house belonged to just the 2 of us. We sat by the fire, the glow casting soft shadows on her face. She told me about her childhood, about how her parents' marriage had been cold, filled with duty, but not love. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "I promised myself I'd never live like that. But here I am, repeating the same story." The room was silent except for the crackle of flames. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to hold her hand. But I didn't. Instead, I said the only words I could manage, "You're not invisible to me." She froze, staring at me as though I had just unlocked a door she had been pounding on for years. Then, slowly, she smiled. Sadly, beautifully. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what that means." I did know, too well. That night, as we parted to our separate rooms, the weight of desire pressed heavily on my chest. We hadn't crossed any physical boundary, but in our hearts, we had already stepped into forbidden territory. The tension was unbearable. Every glance, every word, every accidental brush of fingers became a secret language, a dance of restraint and longing. I tried to convince myself it would fade, that if I avoided her, the feelings would disappear. But the opposite happened. The more I resisted, the more powerful the pull became. I began dreaming of her dreams that left me shaken, guilty, yet craving more. And when I woke, the first thing I longed for was not breakfast, not routine, but the sound of her voice. It was no longer just tension. It was obsession. I knew then that something inevitable was coming. A storm was building. And when it broke, none of us would be the same. The storm I feared did not wait long to arrive. It began on an evening that seemed ordinary. My wife had gone to stay with her sister for a few days after a minor illness, leaving me, my son, and my daughter-in-law alone in the house. My son, always occupied with work, left early in the morning and often returned past midnight. That night was no exception. She and I ate dinner together at the large wooden table, the silence between us broken only by the clinking of utensils. But it was not a hostile silence. It was heavy, charged, as though words unspoken pressed against the walls. Afterward, she began washing dishes while I lingered, pretending to tidy the dining room. My eyes betrayed me, following her movements, the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair fell loose as steam from the sink curled upward. And then she turned, catching me watching. Our eyes met. Neither of us looked away. Something inside me shattered. I stepped closer, slowly, as though drawn by a force greater than my will. She stood frozen, her hands wet, trembling slightly. When I was close enough to feel her breath, she whispered. But her voice lacked conviction. It was more plea than protest. "I know," I said hoarsely. Yet I didn't stop. The next second, my hand lifted hesitant, shaking, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Her eyes closed at my touch, as if she had been waiting for it all along. And then it happened. Our lips met, tentative, desperate, forbidden. A kiss that carried years of loneliness, months of tension, and the dangerous fire of a secret we both knew we could never share. The world outside ceased to exist. The rain against the window, the ticking of the clock, even the weight of morality all vanished in that one moment. When we finally pulled away, gasping, her eyes were wide with fear. "What have we done?" she whispered. Before I could answer, the front door slammed shut. My son's voice echoed in the hallway. "Dad, are you still awake?" Panic seized us. She stepped back, wiping her lips quickly, turning to the sink as though nothing had happened. My heart thundered in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. He entered the kitchen, glancing between us. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I managed to say, my throat dry. "Just cleaning up." He nodded, oblivious, but his eyes lingered on his wife a moment too long, as if sensing something beneath the surface. Then he shrugged it off, retreating upstairs. The danger passed, but the damage was done. We had crossed the line. There was no undoing it. That night, Lying awake in my bed, guilt clawed at me. The face of my son haunted me, the trust in his voice, the casual way he had looked at us. If he ever discovered the truth, it would destroy him, destroy everything. Yet when I closed my eyes, all I could feel was the warmth of her lips, the trembling of her body against mine. The days that followed were unbearable. Every interaction with her was laced with tension, every glance a reminder of what had happened. We avoided being alone together, yet fate seemed determined to trap us in stolen moments. A brush of hands when passing a plate, the lingering scent of her perfume in the hallway, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. One evening, unable to bear the silence, she came to me while my son was at work. Her face was pale, her eyes desperate. "This can't continue," she said firmly, though her voice cracked. "If he finds out—" She couldn't finish. I nodded, though my heart screamed in protest. "You're right. It has to end." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie, because the truth was, I didn't want it to end. Neither did she. That night, in the quiet of the living room, we broke our own promise. Again and again. Every embrace was both a comfort and a curse. Every kiss carried equal parts passion and poison. We lived in two worlds, one of duty and family, the other of desire and secrecy. And each day, the line between them blurred further, until the night the secret almost came undone. It was late, nearly midnight. My son returned earlier than usual, his footsteps heavy, his mood sour. He entered the living room unexpectedly, and there we were too close, her hand still resting on mine. His eyes narrowed. "What's going on here?" The silence that followed was suffocating. She withdrew her hand quickly, stammering something about helping me with the bills. I forced a smile, nodding in agreement. But the doubt in his eyes lingered. He didn't press further, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. That night, after he went to bed, she broke down in tears. "We can't keep living like this," she sobbed. "It will destroy us all." I held her as she cried, torn between love and loyalty, between desire and duty. For the first time, I realized there was no happy ending to this story. Only choices. Only consequences. And no matter what I chose, someone I loved would be broken. The weight of that truth crushed me. And yet, even then, when she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks, all I wanted was to kiss her again. Some stories do not end with clarity. They do not close neatly with lessons learned or wounds healed. Instead, they linger half-finished, unresolved, like a haunting melody that refuses to fade. That is what my life has become since those nights with her. In the days after my son's suspicion flickered to life, the house changed. Conversations grew shorter, dinners quieter. My son's eyes lingered too long on both of us, though he never spoke his fears aloud. My wife, though oblivious to the truth, sensed something amiss. She asked me once, casually, if I felt distant lately. I forced a smile and said I was simply tired, but inside, I was suffocating. She, the woman who had become both my comfort and my curse, also withdrew. She avoided being alone with me, retreating into her room, into silence. When our eyes met across the table, there was longing still, but now, also fear. Fear of discovery, fear of destruction. One evening, she came to me quietly. Her voice shook as she said, "We can't go on like this. We'll ruin everything." I wanted to argue, to tell her I couldn't live without her, but I saw the terror in her eyes and knew she was right. Love, or whatever name this bond deserved, was no longer enough. It was a fire too dangerous to keep burning, and so we ended it, or tried to. From that day, we spoke only when necessary. We performed our roles as if nothing had ever happened. She remained the dutiful wife to my son, the polite daughter-in-law to me, and I, God help me, return to being the quiet father, the silent husband, the man who kept his secrets buried deep. But inside, I was a ruin. Every night, when the house fell silent, I replayed those moments. The accidental touch, the stolen kiss, the whispered confessions. They came to me, not as fantasies, but as ghosts. Ghosts of a love I could never claim, of a sin I could never confess. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying softly in her room. My son, exhausted from work, would sleep through it. But I lay awake, listening, every sob slicing me open. I longed to go to her, to hold her, to tell her she was not alone, but I couldn't, not anymore. Once, I caught her gaze across the garden. My wife was nearby, hanging laundry, and my son was on the phone. For a fleeting second, it was just the two of us, our eyes meeting. She smiled, faintly sad, resigned. It was a smile that said goodbye, even though no words were spoken. That was the last time I allowed myself to look at her like that. Life has continued, as it always does. My son remains oblivious, at least outwardly. My wife goes about her days, unaware of the betrayal lurking in the shadows of her own home. And she carries herself with grace, hiding her sorrow behind polite laughter and dutiful gestures. To the world, nothing has changed. But I know better. We both do. The hardest part is not the guilt, it's the silence. The silence of loving someone you cannot have. The silence of knowing that one wrong step could shatter everything. The silence of living each day as though nothing happened, while inside, everything has. Sometimes I wonder if fate had been kinder, if I had been younger or she older, if circumstances had aligned differently. Could we have been something real? Something, right? But such thoughts are dangerous, useless. What ifs cannot rewrite reality, and so, I carry on. I still sit at the dining table, nodding at her stories, laughing when appropriate. I still watch my son embrace her, pride and affection in his eyes. I still share quiet mornings with my wife, sipping tea as though we are any other ordinary couple. But inside, I am haunted. Every glance at her is a reminder of what almost was. Every silence between us is filled with words we dare not speak. Every night, I lie awake wondering if she too remembers, if she too aches with the same quiet longing. I will never know. Perhaps it is better that way, because in the end, some stories are not meant to be resolved. They remain unfinished, lingering in the spaces between duty and desire, between love and sin, and ours is one of them. So I live with my silence, with my secrets, with the knowledge that once, for a brief and dangerous moment, I touched something real, something forbidden, something unforgettable, and I know I will carry it with me until the day I die.